It doesn't take a genius.
Ramsey!
Mr. Marshall, such a pleasure to see you yet again. And if you don't mind, I'd like to start our proceedings with a joke.
Well, this is It Doesn't Take a Genius first, and I'm kind of excited about it.
You're a
Okay.
you're a book reader and a churchgoer, so I thought I could combine those worlds with a joke I heard a couple years ago. What do John the Baptist and Winnie the Pooh have in common?
I give up.
You're tempted to say honey, aren't you?
I am. I was going with same haircut. They have the same shaped head. Yeah.
Well, they were both furry, I guess, with the camel hair and but anyway, no. The answer, Mike, uh, is the. It's their middle name.
Oh, stop it. Stop it. They have the same middle name. Hang on, let me write this down. I'm sure that killed them in the third grade.
Right.
Big hit. Classic.
Well, so I told that joke because I knew it would get a reaction, and look, that was rhetoric, right? We talked about this last time we met, that good communication is going to involve somehow a message being received, right, and it having an impact, influence of some kind. It got our ball rolling, so it's a little bit of rhetoric to start our proceeding. But notice that the joke doesn't actually work unless there's a little bit of a back and forth, right? So there's got to be some communication between us. That's another one of the liberal arts is the back and forth, and we'll talk about that next time. But none of the joke would have worked at all if you hadn't had an idea of who John the Baptist was and who Winnie the Pooh was, right? There had to have been a little bit of a memory of those two characters. So that's what I actually want to talk about today is the idea of grammar and memory and how it's so important in a modern organization and in your own personal development.
So once again, I have the feeling that you're going to change my definition of words.
Right.
Like you did last time. I learned all new definitions for liberal arts and new definitions for rhetoric. And I have to say, it was probably the most disappointing week of my life because I never once found an opportunity to use the word sophistry in a sentence. I'm waiting. I've got it. Look, I'm going to whip it out when the moment is right. So I'm excited to add to my word power today.
Well, with our political climate, I just can't believe you couldn't find a use for the word sophistry. But I digress.
Yes,
well,
I can yell it at the television,
right.
but we're not going to have this back and forth thing of which you speak.
Right. Well, so let me soften the blow of the education this week with an example from the movie Karate Kid, The Karate Kid. So, and let's talk this through, right? I mean, at the end, he wins the tournament, right, and launches a best-selling Netflix series. I think is how that all went down. Something
that
like
was
that.
That was the flow. Yes,
That was the flow. But anyway, he wins the tournament at the end of the movie. But what did he have to do that? Like to be able to win the tournament and have some success there, have some impact, have some influence. What did Danielson have to do to win?
If I recall correctly, he had to overcome tremendous obstacles.
Sure.
Yes, he was at a tremendous disadvantage, and then he had to do something that was completely unusual and surprising and was not expected.
Yeah, not expected in the moment, right? But totally expected for him, right? The crane kick and frankly all of his training, right? But that's just it. He had to go through some training. And so remember that the training, sure, it was a lot of sparring and practicing moves, but even before that, it was something more basic, right? It's become a joke in our culture. It was wax on, wax off, wax on, wax
So
off.
maybe I'm jumping ahead here. Are you talking about muscle memory?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. Yeah, there's some grammar that we internalize, and the problem is we're not doing that as much anymore. This is what's so scary. I read a quote from the safety official for the Airline Pilots Association, and he was talking about autopilot, and he said we are forgetting how to fly.
Mhm.
Right? We are forgetting how to fly, and we can all relate to this, right? I don't do any orienteering anymore. I don't look at a map and say, "Let's see, I'm going to Columbus, Ohio," and if I go, I just let the little box next to me talk through my speakers and say, "Turn left," and I do it, right? Like I just mindlessly obey the little machine, right? And that's
Oh, yeah.
just on the maps. We could go into so many different areas where this is happening, like. Um, there are articles out there about Google Brain, and this concept that scientists are studying, that the just whole areas of things that we used to internalize, we don't internalize it at all anymore.
Mhm.
Kids going through school, they can just Google the question. There are articles about this, where they just Google the question that's being asked of them, and they don't have to think anymore, right? They can
Right.
just copy down some things that they find online. We're getting really good at using Google, but we're not so great about actually internalizing some data that we can use to then process and think.
No,
So
I think you make
that's
a good
scary.
point. I had a loaner car, and it had the automatic braking. So if there was an object slowing down in front of you, it automatically started braking. And so I became, within a week, the world's worst driver, uh, because I could look to the side and observe things that were going on, having great confidence that if something happened in front of me, the car would automatically begin to slow down. And so by the end of the week, having this car, I was just driving around, just paying no attention whatsoever. It took a week for me to lose my ability to focus and pay attention to the road in front of me.
Great point. And the more practical side of what we're doing in this podcast that I want to highlight is just the idea that a lot of times we just don't know what to do. And that's okay, right? Like that's a great place to start in your coaching, is to say there's something I don't know, and I need to process myself to get there. But some of that stuff, like there are things that we need to go ahead and internalize now. And a lot of our coaching revolves around helping people learn some of those frameworks. And that's where grammar comes into this conversation. The ancients would have had a grammaticus that was essentially a drill master, and you would memorize huge swaths of epic poetry. I mean, pages upon pages upon pages. By the time you're an adolescent, maybe 11 or 12 years old, and you would have already memorized probably more than we've memorized in our entire adult lives. And you can see this happen with kids too, where they're just such a sponge. I watched the Thanksgiving special, the Peanuts Thanksgiving special from the 70s,
Mhm.
and my kids watched it once, maybe twice last year, and just so creepy. The 3-year-old, as they're walking out of the house, goes, they're going to throw away that banana or an apple or something like that. He says, he's going to throw it in the trash can now. And by golly, the next second, cha-chink, shush, cha-chink. And it's like, how does she know that? Well, she's soaking it up at the age when it's maybe easier to soak up, but we can still soak some things up and get better with our grammar of the things that we have to deal with in our world.
Well, I think you make some wonderful points, and I remember memorizing some Shakespeare in high school, uh, but the only Shakespeare that I chose to memorize were the lines that I thought would help me meet girls.
Right.
So it wasn't. I didn't have this holistic view of it. I was like, ah, hark, what light in yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the
Yeah, it's
sun.
the sun. Yeah.
I knew women would be impressed with this. So I put that in there, and the rest of it, not stored.
Right. Well, and that's because it was important to you, right? And some of this is about figuring out what is important to you, and that's what you need to internalize. I hope that what we're doing today is sort of turning up the flame a little bit on the importance of some of this and giving you a sense of urgency that there are some things you want to get down.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, and I think about the things that I have stored and how useful they are, and having the ability to recall them in what I call a game situation. So when
Yeah.
I'm in the moment coaching or working through something in a discussion, and having the recall of that is immensely powerful. So how did the ancient Greeks didn't have Google? So how did the ancient Greeks, how did they do this? How did they become proficient at this skill?
Right. So I mentioned the Grammaticus, and we could talk for a long time about the things that a young person would have memorized. And remember, it would only have been the free young people, and it would have been men because they were, moderately sexist, shall we say. But it was definitely something that they only wanted the people who were going to be leaders and citizens to memorize this stuff, because this was part of what was going to make them a free person. They would not have been able to have been taken captive by their own passions, let alone a sophisticated argument from some sophist giving them some sophistry. They would have been protected from all of that by their clear thinking.
Mhm.
So here's a way to think about that. Augustine talks about this in his autobiography about what is in the memory. It's this huge cavernous space. What's in that space? And he divided it up into some things. There are some impressions that we have. Like my eyes are taking in a view of Mike Marshall right now, and that's going to be stored in my memory. So things that I take in with my five senses are going to be memorized in a sense, right? Mike Marshall's not in my brain. The sense of Mike Marshall is in my brain. But there are
And
other things.
I'd just like to apologize now for that.
Right. Well,
So sorry.
we can talk about a legal settlement later, but
Yes. Were
yeah.
you
So
injured or harmed in any way by the viewing of Mike Marshall's face? If so, call this number now.
I feel like that's a marketing technique we haven't tried, Mike, and maybe it's worth a few billboards in your neck of the woods. I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah. So those are impressions of things that are in my brain from my five senses, but there are some things that are just in my brain. I have, 2 times 2 equals 4 memorized. It's a fact. The knowledge of that is actually in my memory just as much as it's in your memory. The same thing is in our memories, right? 2 times 2 equals 5 is not in your brain because it's not true. So there are some things that are just true knowledge that are in our brain. So we have impressions, we have knowledge, and then the third thing is just sort of things that register themselves by the impact that they've made, but they're not there anymore. But the impact is still there. The memory of that thing, we've all lost loved ones, and I was very sad in the moment when those losses occurred. And I'm not that kind of sad anymore, but I have the memory of that emotion, right? And it can be recalled sometimes in pretty ugly ways, right? In some moments. So there are some different kinds of things that go into our memory. And one of the tricks of grammar to the ancients was being able to have that framework down of the different things that are in there. The fact that you can categorize things is part of the power here. So let me give a modern example of where this plays out. We've talked about the book Crucial Conversations. It's about how to have high impact, but in many ways risky, difficult conversations because of what's on the line. And one of the things that I help my coaching clients do is categorize what's going on there. There are some things that they have observed with their five senses. Here are some facts. They have taken those in and have impressions of them in their brain. They also have some feelings about those facts. It might even be recalling some emotions from previous experiences that they've had. And those are also, it's true that they had those emotions, that they had those feelings. It's not true that those emotions are the truth of that situation, right? I noticed that you haven't taken the garbage out for the last month. That's true, right? I have observed that with my five senses. I feel like you're not pulling your weight, is how I feel about that. And it wouldn't be fair for me to go to my spouse and say, spouse, you're not pulling your weight. Fact. It's not a fact, right?
Right.
And it's also a really stupid thing to do if you value that relationship, right? So, so there's a way to have that conversation, but you can't start it until you get the grammar right of what's going on and separate out the senses from the facts, from the emotions that are stored in your memory that get swirled into that whole event. So there's one example of how categorizing and getting a grammar to what's going on in your head, let alone of what's going on out in front of you, can be a game changer.
Well, and I think it's one of the things that I think we bring to the table through our coaching, because oftentimes people will tell us what happened.
Yes.
You know, this happened and he did this, he didn't do that, you know, this transpired. And then people haven't put a lot of thought into the feelings that were generated by that.
Yep.
And so sometimes we'll just simply ask, so when that all happened, how did you feel?
Right.
And you can just see him kind of looking inward introspectively and going, how did that make, okay, I was disappointed, you know, and so you start to label these things, and then you
Right.
start to understand why this impacted you so much.
Yeah.
And even in a work setting, you're right, feelings are generated, and they can be positive or negative, but we do have to talk about them and the impact that they have on the person's ability to coach and lead and change the situation. So
100%.
most people don't think about it, right? They experienced it, but they don't think about it to the point that they could deal with it.
So it's so interesting that you say that, because just a little preview for our listeners, both of you, we have an upcoming guest speaker who is a very well-regarded psychologist who speaks about categorizing your emotions. And I don't know how much we'll get into that in her session. It's going to be really interesting to see where that conversation goes. But the concept of just getting down some basic emotions and saying, which of these four do I have and what intensity level of that emotion do I have? That's a huge game changer for some people. You're naming something. It no longer has authority over you. You have authority over it, because you can say, that's what's going on. It's not this big mystery that's bubbling up from within me. I have a little bit of control over this now. Another example from that, you know, so we can talk about separating facts and feelings. We can talk about, you know, categorizing your emotions. There's also categorizing sort of the personality styles of yourself and those around you. And again, this is something our guest speaker, can we say her name, Mike? Is that allowed?
Let's do it. Let's just spoiler alert. Go ahead and say it.
It's Pamela Cole, who was a huge early user of DISC, and in fact created the first online DISC assessment that's still available from Wiley to this day. And DISC is an ancient way of categorizing personality types, and you can basically boil it down to two questions. If you have these two questions memorized as a part of your grammar, so to speak, you can ask those questions in your head about a person and be able to quickly decide which of four ways to approach this person about whatever issue you know you're talking about. So incredibly practical for dealing with employees, for dealing with customers, family members. We could go on and on. Again, it's just about memorizing some things to be able to do that. You can't go have the sparring match until you've done wax on, wax off and have that muscle memory. That's where we're at in what we're trying to develop with grammar. So,
well, and you said something that was very important to me. So when we were thinking of memorization, and we're thinking of loading our toolbox with all this knowledge, that knowledge does include questions. And
Yes.
and so yeah, having great questions available to you
Yeah.
in the moment at game time
Yeah.
is incredibly important.
Yeah.
And those who have that skill and can ask those great questions and then listen, they're light years ahead of those whom they interact with that don't have that ability.
Oh, 100%. And it's the point of the book, The Coaching Habit, right? It's
Mhm.
7 questions and around 7 sort of techniques that you can develop that if you have them in you, you can pull them out in the moment and coach one of your people, in the elevator because you're ready to go. You have that muscle memory from that habit that you've developed. And I think that's a huge part of what coaching is giving people is an inventory of the right question to ask. Bosses can do it, coaches can do it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm. I think that's absolutely perfect. And even a parent, right? We,
Yes.
we, we learn as parents, not to ask, how was school? Uh,
Yeah.
we had that as part of our muscle memory, and lo and behold, doesn't work.
Right.
Fine. You get the standard
Right.
answer. So changing that question to what was the best part of your day? Well, what did you learn today? Things like that. Having those questions, even in a personal setting, changes the interaction dramatically.
Yeah, I think that's great. And it's, parenting is pointing out something that maybe we should use as a cap to this whole part of the conversation, which is, parents care about their kids. And so they get really intentional about things that they can do, habits that they can develop, grammar that they need to internalize for the betterment of their kids. And so I would argue that that's a great place to start this grammar discussion is, think about what's really at your core, something that's really important to you. And you want to grow in that area for the sake of your team or your organization or your personal goals, whatever it is. And that's a great place to start some intentionality around what you need to start internalizing to take some steps. It's different things for different people, but I do fall back to the idea of categorizing, having some frameworks in your head that you can use to sort out all the different things that are happening to you as you go through the day, a big part of that. So just being intentional about this is a great place to start.
I think you make a great point. And so think about the interactions in your life, whether they're life or work, and then what could make those interactions more valuable, and then go learn and memorize the things that the behaviors, the questions, the things that will help make those interactions more valuable. So, yeah, I think this is a fantastic tip from the ancient Greeks as translated by Mark Ramsey.
Right. Which ought to terrify all of us, but
Uh,
hey.
yes. I'm so glad you're studying it and then can provide me with the cliff notes along with both our listeners. So
Right.
I do appreciate that. Any last tip before we close this out?
No, I think the main thing is that memory is the start of this, and we're going to talk in one more session for this scenario about what you go do to really wrestle with what you've learned. So this is just the beginning. We talked about the end last time. This is the beginning, and we've got a middle part to go. So stay tuned.
Perfect, perfect. Looking forward to it. And as always, we'll turn our attention to our non-Greek announcer. See what he has to say about us at this point. I always wondered where he lives.
And that's it. Join us next time when you'll hear Mike say, well, I'm sure he'll say something pithy. Don't miss it. Next time, it doesn't take a genius.
That's good enough.